The microphone here is so they can record the presentation. So you can clip it onto your lapel or hold on to it. But you have to use your outdoor voices for the folks here. So first of all, thank you for being here. My name is Bart Treese. I'm the director of the Mobility Innovation Center here at the University of Washington. And what we do at the center is we bring the best of public sectors, partners, private industry, nonprofits to work with academia to solve transportation and mobility challenges through applied research. The session here is a topic that is something that we're working on at the center with some of our partners. You'll meet Armand here in a moment, but also Chris from the College of Built Environments, Department of Construction Management. But it's all about electrification and transportation. This is a really exciting, interesting topic, but there's different approaches for this. So I'm going to use a phrase from a speaker that Daphne and I met, when we first met, was a lady from BC Hydro who said, the way that we got here isn't how we're going to get to where we need to be. And so it's all about change and disruption and how transportation electrification is different. You're going to see different partners who have to work together, and I use the kind of analogy as dancing partners, right? So it might be a bit awkward at first. It might be a bit disjointed. It might be kind of embarrassing. But at the end, hopefully you're moving well together. So with that, I'm going to give our first speaker is going to be Armand from the city of Seattle. And Armand, you want to just give a brief overview of who you are and what you do at the city, and I'll get your presentation up.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to our post-lunch session. My name's Armand Shabazian. I'm the Electric and Automated Mobility Policy Advisor at the Seattle Department of Transportation, which is a department of the city of Seattle. So in the team that I'm on, we manage aspects of the right-of-way, including EV charging, and then also general policy to advance electrification of other transportation mobility types, which I'll get into in more detail in the presentation. All right, thank you. So I'll be talking to you all about how we are electrifying Seattle with the work that we're doing at the Seattle Department of Transportation. Really quick, this is our vision, mission, values, and goals, and one of the goals that you'll see is sustainability, and electrification fits into all of our values and helps us to deliver a transportation system that allows affordable access to places and opportunities. So a quick presentation outline. I'll go over what Seattle's context is for electrification, some lessons from our climate change response framework, which was recently released, and then I'll go into various electrification efforts, including personal vehicles, fleets, shared mobility, freight, and others. So for some context, electrification is really set up to work well in Seattle because of our low greenhouse gas power mix. More than 85% of the power in the city of Seattle comes from hydropower, and Seattle City Light, which is the utility for the city, is carbon neutral. So that really sets us up to electrify our transportation system without any of the upstream effects that other locations might see who have less efficient forms of power generation. Because our power mix is so sustainable, transportation is the largest piece of Seattle's greenhouse gas emissions. So you'll see on this pie chart that transportation represents 60% of Seattle's greenhouse gas emissions. So electrification of transportation is highly important to us. So recently, very recently, last month, or earlier this month, I suppose, the Seattle Department of Transportation released our climate change response framework, which provides different outcomes to achieve mode shift and various outcomes to hit our 2030 goals of what we want transportation to look like. And you'll notice when we took our baseline, which was 2019 pre-pandemic, to establish a regular baseline, in that year, 1% of travel was with electric vehicles. By 2030, we want that share to be 10%. You'll also see increases in other modes such as biking, walking, and using transit, and ultimately resulting in a reduction of using gasoline or diesel-powered vehicles for transportation. And you can find this climate change response framework on our website if you Google climate change response framework. So really quickly, transportation is a geometry problem. So we understand that as we work towards these 2030 goals, we can't necessarily assume that we're going to hit all of our outcomes by doing a one-to-one conversion of all gasoline and diesel vehicles to electric vehicles. We need to also think about a multimodal system that allows for folks to have easier access to walking, biking, using micromobility, taking transit, so that we can incentivize people away from driving because we simply don't have the space to account for everyone driving an electric vehicle to meet our transportation emissions reduction goals. And why should we think about this? In Seattle, the average trip within the city is 2.2 miles. So when you think about that, those are distances that are easily achieved with other modes, especially if we make those modes more attractive and we incentivize their use. We also have seen from our climate change response framework that as we invest money into these alternative modes, including electrification of vehicles, that we see co-benefits, including more positive health and safety outcomes from achieving electrification. So we are really thinking about that as we consider what electrification looks like in Seattle beyond just the personal vehicle. You may have interest, though, in what this means for electric vehicles, so I'll get into this in a moment, but I just will note that our climate change response framework does not assume that our outcomes by 2030 are achieved only with vehicle electrification. We understand that people will continue to drive and that electrifying those vehicles is important, but we do have many other outcomes that I'll get into to achieve that. So Seattle's EV context. More than half of the city's residents are renters, which makes it challenging for them to install their own EV charging systems at home because they might not be able to achieve that with an agreement with their landlord, for example, or they may live in a multifamily building where they don't necessarily have the ability to install their own charging equipment to support an electric vehicle. We also know that King County and Seattle are adopting EVs at a high rate, and that Seattle has some of the lowest electric rates in the country because of our hydro generation. So this chart shows you EV adoption in Seattle specifically. This is data from the Washington State Department of Licensing, and you can see that EV adoption even within the city is growing at a very high rate. And when you look countywide, it's at an even steeper rate. At the Seattle Department of Transportation, we're concerned about other modes too, so we have a lot to consider. What this chart will show you is that we need to assume that we're able to accommodate electric vehicles while also accommodating all the other uses at the curb, including sidewalk cafes, bus lanes, bike lanes, so on and so forth. And so you'll see that in residential and commercial and mixed-use areas, storage, vehicle storage, which is where EV charging might happen in the right-of-way, is ranked lower than some of our other priorities. And so we also have to take into consideration what works best in our limited geography. So we've been engaged in efforts to achieve vehicle electrification for some time. We released guidance to allow for folks that park near their home to charge with a cable over the sidewalk using a cable cover. This guidance has since been adopted by Washington, D.C. and Portland. In 2017, we also released a pilot program to permit the installation of EV charging equipment in the right-of-way. So this photo shows the first two chargers that were installed in Beacon Hill under this program. Something that we learned, which is detailed in the evaluation report, is that there are many constraints to installing charging equipment in the right-of-way, which is why the city stepped in to install these chargers and why we received limited interest from the private sector. We also have done work to understand where EV charging should be prioritized most, which is our electric vehicle service equipment roadmap. So this map on the left shows you where EV charging could be most utilized using a variety of factors, including proximity to businesses and transit lines. And this central image shows a zoomed-in area in North Seattle where it could be advantageous to install EV charging equipment to support things like Uber and Lyft drivers who might electrify their vehicles. So that leads me to today. We are in the process of installing level 2 chargers in the city of Seattle. The map on the left with all the red flags shows every single community submission we received. We received nearly 2,000 requests in 3 months from the community to install chargers near their home. The central map shows you on the blue dots where these chargers will be installed, and then the orange dots show existing chargers. So under this pilot program, we're installing curbside charging in the right-of-way at 31 locations locations across the city, funded by the City of Seattle. It's a pilot program that will allow us to evaluate usage and how this new use of the right-of-way might develop our final policy considerations for charging. So these are the 3 different charger types that we're installing under the program. The charger on the left is a pedestal-mounted charger. The central charger is one mounted to a metal streetlight pole, and then the image on the right is a charger mounted to a wooden utility pole. And these different charger installation types allow us to leverage existing assets in the right-of-way to provide EV charging without putting extra clutter in our limited space in the furniture zone, which is this planting strip between the sidewalk and the street. So this is a really unique way that the city is able to provide charging for folks in residential areas. So we're really excited to be piloting these 3 different types and learn which ones work best. We're also really excited that all 3 units use retractable cables. Cable theft has been a big issue for charging providers, and the retractable cable allows it to be secure for less chance of vandalism. So that's another thing that we'll be looking at in our evaluation. I want to quickly spotlight that at one of our locations, we partnered with a car share co-op to provide the first electric ADA accessible van in Washington State, which is really exciting. This is a partnership with the Zero Emissions Vehicle Co-op, which is the vehicle provider, and Estelitos Library, which is a community justice library in central Seattle. So at the charging station we've installed, we have 1 spot open for the public and then 1 spot that's dedicated to the van share, which is available for the public to rent. I'll really quickly talk about our fleet electrification program. So we have a goal that by 2030, the city's fleet will be 100% fossil fuel free. So we have been working really closely with other city departments to socialize different fleet electrification options. Most recently, we had a fleet showcase to showcase some of these zero emissions vehicles, from passenger vehicles to vans to backhoes to sweepers. And this image is E. Broomer, who is on the streets of Seattle right now sweeping bike lanes. So this is really exciting for us to see what works and what doesn't work and what we might want to wait on. Something that has been very innovative is we're renting a lot of this equipment so that crews can give us their feedback before we commit to purchasing vehicles, because there is some change management. Next, I'll talk about shared mobility, which is really exciting for us. Shared mobility includes electric scooters and bikes for rental. You may see them on the streets, the Lime bikes or the Bird scooters. In 2023 so far, we have achieved more than 4 million miles traveled on these modes, which is really encouraging. We've also seen a 40% year-over-year growth rate. So what you'll see on this chart is 2022 compared to 2023 for each month, and you'll notice quite an increase in trips. We also have seen that our trips are averaging about 1.3 miles per trip, which really fits in to that metric from the climate change response framework that trips in Seattle average around 2.2 miles. So that really shows us that a lot of trips can be diverted to shared mobility. We've also been launching some exciting pilot programs, such as providing rider discounts for folks that use the scooters and bikes to connect to transit. And then I'll talk about freight as well. So we are also working on electrifying freight vehicles. Most recently, the City of Seattle has launched a heavy-duty truck electrification pilot, which provides incentives for owners of drayage trucks, which provide movement of goods between ports to electrify their vehicles with a pretty large incentive, which is exciting to see. And then we have also been working with C40 cities, of which Seattle is a member, on e-bike for freight use, which is really exciting. So this image shows an earlier pilot with UPS to pilot electric cargo bikes for freight delivery, and we're in the process of kicking off a more formal program to allow for e-cargo bikes to do load and unload at the curb in an effort to divert some of these emissions from trucking to zero emissions. And with that, I will open for any questions.
We'll shoot questions
at the end?
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you, Armand.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch the presentation here.
Yep.
You have this one.
Cool.
Do you know how to do presentation mode? Because I can't see it.
Just the arrow to the right. Fine.
You got it? Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, I have it.
All right. This is Daphne de Jong, and she is the founder and CEO of Ven. And she's going to tell you a little bit about her company, but she's got a startup here based in Seattle, and I think she's got a really great approach to electrification, and all yours.
Yeah, thanks. Should I use this? Does it work?
It's recording.
Oh, okay.
And there's no microphone in the room, so
Great.
that's the video.
I'm loud. Well, first of all, it's interesting to be here as a startup at a university surrounded by academics. I hope to provide a bit of a different sound to this conversation. A little bit about us. We came out of Madrona Venture Labs here in Seattle. So we work with that investment firm, and I'll talk a bit about their process. Originally, I'm from the Netherlands. You can see the bottom of the presentation, but it's fine. I worked on some of the companies on the right side, and so I worked in the transportation sector most of my life. Originally from the Netherlands, and I moved here and started working for Waymo, so Google Self-Driving, where I was responsible for the electrification of our fleet from Chrysler Pacifica to Jaguar I-Pace. We saw our utilization rate of our fleet drop by about 60%, had to change our business model and figure out how to solve for that problem. And so the urgency was obvious. Then I worked for SpaceX, where I was the only product manager for Starlink, so for our constellation, both for DoD, enterprise, and consumer. On the DoD side, we were integrating antennas on 5th-gen aircraft and our Falcon 9 rockets, and that came also with its own challenges, very similar to what we're seeing on the transportation side for vehicle-to-vehicle communication. And lastly, at Rivian, where we did the charging infrastructure optimization, but also autonomous vehicle signals, as much as you can call level 2 autonomous. My co-founder actually went to UW. She has a PhD in geophysics and mathematics, has worked in ML for a long time, and both of us really care about the climate space, which is why we started this company, and also to not report to a boss that wants to go to space. A little bit about the problem. For us, a big problem is a big opportunity, right? So we look at it from a very different perspective. We don't think, oh, there is a huge problem for a consumer space or for the commercial fleet side. Let's work with government. We went into a bit of a different direction. We said, okay, there's a better way to solve this and to guarantee a better user experience, what these companies are looking for. As a startup, it's hard to find numbers, and so that's why the slide is here. You can look at McKinsey reports, and they're either overly optimistic or overly pessimistic, depending who writes the report. We can work with universities, and we get very specific data for a specific region, but it doesn't answer our questions. So for us, it's a macro problem. We care about the United States as a whole, and so the estimations you see here are wild estimations, but they go into our business plan, and that's just kind of how it works. And what we do with investors is we define a problem. We say, okay, this is a problem that's worth solving because it's a big industry. And now how do we get to market, right? So the next step is to define a specific customer group that has the biggest problem and also the biggest opportunity, and hopefully some deep pockets as well. And so we found, or narrowed down on the commercial real estate sector. We believe that there's the biggest potential for them to solve for some of these infrastructure problems that we see, especially in some big cities in the U.S., including New York and others, where we see a big push and pull, both through regulation and incentives that are being put in place. But also they own the real estate, they own the parking lots. They're working already with these ride-hailing companies to define, power supply and timelines and what they care about over time. And also, they're not always the most technical customer, and so that's where we can come in and work with them on this problem. And it's a really big industry, right? So like the charging side right now, there's a couple of players that provide hardware, including ChargePoint that owns about half the market of L2 chargers in the United States, as well as Tesla with their fast charging systems. Still, they don't fill more than about 6% of the market that's required today. And so it sounds there's a lot of noise around these companies, but the problem is not necessarily being solved, which is something that a lot of people are not focusing on unless they're focusing on the business opportunity. So we're talking to other companies on the demand side as well, including Cruise, and they tend to agree that whomever owns commercial real estate might win this game as much as is a game. And then there's urgency for these commercial real estate companies. So that's the next thing we look at. Like, is there an opportunity? And then are they going to act within the next 5 to 7 years? And then is it going to be like a venture-sized company, meaning within 10 years you can make $100 million of revenue on a yearly basis? That's the definition for that. And right now, there's real urgency for them to either install charging and or figure out a way for them to upgrade buildings. And there's a lot of course, building code. I'm sure this group is very familiar with building code proposals in different cities and different states. But a lot of these commercial customers are not. And they're looking for guidance and they're looking for simple solutions. I was also in New York for Climate Week, where I met with a couple of commercial real estate companies, and they've all said the same thing, which is this real push is driven by investors. It's a unique category of customers because these buildings will last for at least 50 years, so it's a very long-term investment. So when they build these new buildings, they need to ensure that they don't have to invest like 5 years in with a huge operational budget. And so they care about future-proofing their buildings now. What we do real quick is like charging infrastructure as a service, where we provide subscription models to these companies, and we include the hardware, which we think is going to commoditize over time, especially working with some manufacturers in Europe. And we build kind of the software layer on top of the charging network that does all the optimization, but also we provide features that help them generate a revenue. And so, for example, scheduling, remote control, multi-user group management, dynamic pricing is stuff that they're looking for that's not provided by existing hardware companies in a way that they're looking for. Now, what is it like to have a startup in this space in the Pacific Northwest? It's a little difficult, honestly, at times, and we're oftentimes put in the climate bucket. And what that means is that we talk to investors, and they're asking not only for the business opportunity, but also the CO2 impact and timelines, and now it's politicized, and some investors might not care about this space, and some do care, and it's an emotional conversation, versus us being able to speak to the potential revenue that we generate right now versus a year from now versus 5 years from now. We're also looking to work with the public sector. It's very bureaucratic. It's hard for us to navigate on a national level versus a local level, because there's a lot of work that we need to do in different cities and different locations. Lastly, we spend a lot of time educating our LPs, our limited partners, and investors on both the climate space and the mobility space. There's a lot of open questions, and as I mentioned, it's politicized, and so that comes with misinformation. And that's sometimes difficult because instead you want to work on building a company, and now you're educating people on the topic. Things that we would like to see in this area. First, access to data. And what I mean by that is, and I'll show you on the next slide, is it was very difficult to set a benchmark of the current state of electrification in the United States for us. There are some reports, but it seems like everyone uses different methods to find that information. It's very subjective. Whomever pays for the research has some say in what the outcome is going to be, and that's difficult to really, take that bet based on a lack of information. Secondly, we're not only looking for financing, but also pilots, and real pilots with real customers, and it doesn't have to be paid, but quick feedback is very important to us, and we haven't seen a good climate where it's easy to navigate that, and so that's usually something that's in Europe provided by the government, and we don't see that happening here in a way that's fast and easy. So lastly, public-private partnerships, where there's a lot of work going on in Seattle, but what does it mean to companies? And there is a level of urgency. We don't want to wait actually till 2030 until we have 10% of electric vehicles driving around. We want to do that now. And so how can we accelerate the process? So this is an example of where we were looking at a benchmark. We couldn't find a map of all infrastructure that's installed, and so we created one for the whole United States, including private and commercial charging installations, fast charging, L2, and sometimes we even think where people charge their vehicle using a regular outlet. And then we cleaned that data set, and then we're using that to take our own decisions. So we look at where commercial companies are located, and then we overlay that with our map. Something that we built ourselves, again, because we couldn't find it. and we'd love to work with people that are working on similar initiatives so that we don't have to do everything ourselves. And then lastly, if people are interested in learning what we're doing or working with us, please reach out. We're located in Seattle, but we're very much focused on the eastern U.S. market as well.
Thank you, Daphne. And we'll do questions at the end as a reminder. While I'm setting this up, give this to you.
Can I have you here?
Yeah, please do.
Oh. Hopefully I didn't break it.
That's the main screen. Okay. Please allow me to introduce Chris Lee. He's a professor at the Department of Construction Management in the College of Built Environments. Chris and I have worked on a couple projects together at ABF. But we worked on one project with Armand, which is the Mobility Hubs electrification project. That also includes King County Metro and Seattle City Light, about how you redesign, redevelop park and rides for shared mobility, but and also electrification. And also, I believe you're going to talk about public-private partnerships for...
Yeah, that's one of the main topics that I want to talk about.
So I don't want to steal your thunder, but please welcome Chris.
Hi. Well, thank you, Bart. Did I do something? Oh, no. I'm sorry. How can I get the slide back to the... It's here, but it's not here.
I think you can.
That's weird.
Oh, there.
And then you just forward it with either pushing that or...
Okay. I'm a Mac user. Okay. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Chris Lee. I'm an associate professor in the Construction Management Department at UW. So my journey in sustainability started with my PhD study on a commercial energy retrofit investment in Wisconsin. And then I've been expanding my research area toward residential solar panel installation on the rooftop and a community solar in a bigger scale. And then later I also looked at sustainable data centers. And now I'm getting into transportation electrification, all thanks to... Louder?
Could you speak up a little bit?
Okay. Yeah, I'm getting into transportation electrification more and more, which is an exciting opportunity. Well, thanks to Bart. Just like Bart mentioned, I'm now involved in 2 King County Metro funded projects through our Mobility Innovation Center. And we are about to wrap up one this month, and I'm going to wrap up another one by the end of this year. So very exciting. Today, I'm going to talk about 2 of my electrification-related research topics. The first one is about applying public-private partnership, so-called P3. I think previous presenter just briefly talked about it, to bus-based electrification. And then second is about clean energy justice around electrification by evaluating adoption patterns of residential EV chargers in Seattle. So for the first project, let me give you some background about what unique challenges a public agency may face when they are pursuing bus-based electrification and why we care about applying P3 to overcome those challenges. First and foremost, as many of you know, when you are electrifying bus spaces that host hundreds of buses, it will require a huge amount of electrical demand, and subsequently it will require significant upgrade to the existing grid. And also, a lot of agencies that are out there trying to pull this off in a very aggressive timeline. For example, King County Metro has a plan in place to turn their fleet into electrified one by 2035, which is a very aggressive timeline. And also for electrification, transportation electrification projects require a high level of resiliency. It's because the grid system is increasingly disturbed and shut down with the increasing number of extreme weather events that we are all experiencing due to global climate change. And also, these projects are not cheap. It requires a huge amount of capital in billions of dollars, while most agencies that are out there currently do not have required experience or expertise to develop, operate, and maintain charging infrastructure or charging systems. So what is this thing called P3, public-private partnership? P3 refers to a long-term contractual relationship between a public agency and a private entity that involves private financing. And in P3 setup, private partners should be able to take on performance guarantees by taking on significant amount of risk. So by doing P3, the agency should be able to achieve expedited project timeline, especially when they have aggressive timeline for their electrification projects, while getting private financing from outside, so that they don't have to worry about bringing a lot of money from either federal or other side. And also, through the performance guarantee, P3 can help reduce risks of capital expenditure and operational expenditure overruns while bringing much needed expertise and experience through the life cycle of electrician project, including operation and maintenance. And oftentimes, which is interesting, P3 involves developing and operating and maintaining a microgrid, which will significantly improve the overall resiliency of systems, charging system and charging infrastructure. So in this specific project that we are doing, we aim to support public agencies who are willing and interested to use P3 for their electrician project by developing P3 decision-making framework and by developing RFP, request for proposal best practices. And in this slide, we have a snapshot of key decision-making criteria, the most important decision-making criteria that we identify from the project, including public-private financing needs and delivery speed, utility, and technology ownership involving solar systems, charging systems, and battery systems that are all tied to microgrid. And lastly, unique needs of operation and maintenance. And based on this key decision-making criteria, we went ahead and developed an important question that we want the public agencies to be able to answer when they are pursuing P3 idea for the electrification project. And here is a snapshot. Given the time, I'm not going to go through every little detail, but this report will be published soon at Mobility Innovation Center. So if you are interested in learning more about this, we'll be happy to share. And lastly, we are trying to develop best practices in request for proposal process when agency is looking to use P3 for their project. And here's another snapshot. And again, this is an ongoing project where Bart and I work together, funded by King County Metro. We are almost done, as I mentioned earlier, and the final report will be available from the Mobility Innovation Center website probably next month, which is what we are envisioning. Just in case you are interested in learning more about it. Okay. Our second project, this is a totally different side of electrification. As many of you agreed, electrification and EV charging has been one of the biggest buzzwords in American society and American built environment. Oftentimes, its social implication and social aspect are overlooked. In response, our research team has a specific goal of analyzing and investigating clean energy adoption disparities around EV charging by looking at our own city, Seattle. And we presume that when you look at residential EV charging adoption patterns, there will be disparities by technologies and a community of different areas in Seattle. So for that, this research involved identifying specific vulnerable community in terms of clean energy justice and identifying key variables that are affecting clean energy adoption patterns and its disparities. And in this setup, clean energy justice refers to all people having equitable and affordable access to clean energy technology, regardless of their nationality, races, income level, educational or religious background, geographic location, and so on and so forth. And to achieve this goal, we looked at data sets from American Community Survey census and City of Seattle permit data. Sorry, just keep falling off. Hopefully I didn't break it. Okay, so this slide shows some of the key findings that we got, and the map on the left side kind of shows you the clean energy adoption patterns of residential EV chargers in the whole Seattle area arranged by census tracts, and it shows the apparent spatial and community disparities. And based on these identified disparities, and by analyzing a dozen relevant variables, we are able to determine that EV charging adoption in the residential sector are more related to economic variables than housing variables, especially when it's compared to solar adoption. And we believe this study has a significant implication for those who have to come up with equitable policy solutions, such as policymakers, to promote the advancement of EV charging in public sector and private sector by accounting for clean energy access and clean energy and justice. Through this research, my student and I were able to develop half dozen publications, and most of which already published. So if you are interested in learning more about this research effort, please just let me know. I'll be happy to share my papers with you. And this research was funded by our own internal seed grant in the college. So their support is gratefully acknowledged. I think that's all I have. Thanks for attention.
Did she kill it?
I have no idea. I'm sorry.
Okay, I think I fixed Mr. Fuzzy. All right, thank you, Chris. And as I'm getting this up, please welcome, Ling Wu. She is a professor here at the College of the Department of Construction Management in the College of Built Environment. And as I'm getting her presentation up, wherever it is, there we go. And you are right here. Is this you? There we go. Okay. Excellent. All right, and so you want to talk into Mr. Fuzzy here. Okay. So it's recording the camera, but you have to use your outdoor voice because it's not a microphone. So welcome, Ling. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Bart, for inviting me, and thank you everyone to still stay here with us. I know this is the last session, and many of you have some commute to do, right? So I will be brief. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about looking at from an equitable perspective on our EV adoption, EV penetration, as well as the public EV infrastructure in Washington State. A little bit about myself. Currently, I'm serving as assistant professor in the College of Built Environments. I'm also an adjunct professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Alberta. Before joining UW, I have about 5 years experience in the industry, as well as 8 years spent in universities, serving as RAs and postdoc, etc. For today's presentation, we're going to follow a very brief outline. We're going to talk a little bit about the background, some information from literature telling us how nationwide we're doing, other states, and then we're going to talk about, in my research, what are the questions, what are the problem statements, and I'm going to introduce a little bit about preliminary findings, and lastly, references. Before I move on to the next slide, can anyone guess what are typical profile of a EV owner and EV user, the current EV owners? Any guesses? Yes?
Probably wealthy.
Wealthy, yes. Higher household family income, yes. Any other?
Education.
Educated and?
In favor of high-tech.
Yes, probably work in the high-tech industry or very knowledge about technologies and care about sustainability, environmental impact. Any other guesses? Fashionable, yes, especially if a Tesla driver, right? And
Urban or suburban rather than rural?
yes, urban, suburban rather than rural, yes. So from literature, we know the profile of current EV owner, they're typically male, higher educated, from high-income household, homeowners who has homes, and they typically have multiple vehicles in their household. So they don't just rely on EV for all their travel needs, and they have access to home charging. So currently, majority of the EV users heavily relying on home charging. And from literature, we also know there are strong correlations between public charging facilities and EV adoption rate. So this trend is both national-wide as well as municipal level. Further, we know, even from the previous presentations, we know public charging facilities are crucial for residents who are renters, who are living in, for example, apartments, have no access or not able to install or too pricey for them to install home charging facilities. And because of this, we say disadvantaged communities, maybe communities have residents who are the opposite end of current typical EV owners. The other end, these disadvantaged communities, they need a higher proportion of public EV charging facilities comparing with, we see the current owners, current EV users, these communities. And from a case study in California, we discovered public EV charging infrastructure is not equitably distributed or installed. If we continue this trend and if we fail to focus on social equity when we're planning for public EV charging station, this would amplify existing inequity and causing continued harm to this already underrepresented, underserved population. So for this research project, our main focus is to look at what is the current status of equity situation in terms of EV adoption as well as EV infrastructure installation in Washington state. We are trying to quantify and to measure the accessibility of the current EV charging stations from users' perspective, from communities' perspective. And thus we're able to create guidelines for future EV infrastructure expansion in Washington and provide even cases for the national level. So this is the stats, the data we got from registration, similarly, but this graph is for the entire Washington state. So we know for now, in 2022, last year, we have about 165,000 battery electric vehicle registered. That includes renewal. And for 2023, the forecast is we used past 10 years average increase rate. We forecast we are going to have about 220,000 units, registered EV units for this year in Washington. And we also differentiate between Tesla and non-Tesla. We actually see there's increased market overtake for Tesla in terms of all the EV users. This actually also signals one concerning fact for when we're trying to push for zero emission for entire Washington state for national perspective. That is, right now we see more and more higher end model for electric vehicle and less lower end models compared with 10 years ago. So that's definitely a concern as well in terms of equity and diversity. And next we plotted the EV adoption rate. So how we calculate the adoption rate, we use the registered EV number divided by all registered vehicle. And it's not surprising, King County has the highest rate. It's about 3% right now. And followed by San Juan Island region, and then the next group sits about 1.4% are Snohomish County and Jefferson County. And even diving into smaller communities, some smaller community size, we look at the zip code level at EV adoption rate. These are the top 5 zip code areas where the highest we found the EV adoption rate is around 10%. And this zip code this area is the just south of International District. And the next step we're going to do is we're actually going into the specific zip code area and to do more in-depth sort of case study, trying to understand what are the potential associated factors that drives these EV adoption much higher than the other region, and what can we learn from them. This is another, looking at EV adoption from another perspective. We calculated per 1,000 population how many EV numbers. So the highest, you see again, the same zip code here again, that the highest value we get is about 111 EV units per 1,000 population. And this map also matches with our EV adoption, where you see the highest region are the King County region. In terms of public EV charging infrastructure, the zip code area that has the highest number of public charging stations is 98004, which is also one of the top 5, if you remembered, one of the top 5 zip code area in terms of EV adoption rate. So this zip code area is in Bellevue, which is not surprising. We see trend actually, the EV, even though they don't come up the toppest, the very top in terms of EV adoption, but their EV adoption rate is still among the very high region. So this 98004 zip code area has total 157 charging stations. And we looked even further into these top 5 zip code areas in terms of their charging ports. So this lightest blue are all charging ports. It seems like averaging every charging station has about 2 charging ports. And the majority of the charging ports are level 2 charging ports, which also similar to Armand, your presentation regarding there is a push in terms of installing level 2 public charging station. The third step we did is these are still very preliminary results, but we're trying to again associate or trying to understand what are the association or correlation between what we saw in terms of the profiles of current EV adoption. So we're trying to understand, we plot the first from the left map, left chart, you will see the EV adoption rate versus the household median income. We actually do see a correlation there. The second, the middle map, you will see is EV adoption rate versus percentage of population that has a bachelor degree or higher. The last one we plotted that indicates the EV adoption rate versus every EV charging station, how many EV vehicles that are supporting. So this map tells us directly is that our infrastructure, the EV infrastructure, is correlated with how many EVs are there in each unit and in each region. So the next step for us is to going deeper in this direction in terms of analysis from environmental justice perspective to identify disadvantaged communities versus advantaged communities, from energy justice perspective to understand the communities, the disadvantaged communities versus advantaged communities, and from traffic justice perspective to understand these disadvantaged communities versus advantaged communities, and understand what are the public EV charging infrastructure's needs in terms of different communities, and how are we able to support each communities in terms of this electrification process in Washington. So that concludes my presentation for today. Thank you.
We have time for questions. And I've got questions, but hopefully you have some. So we'll start if you've got is that a hand raise or is that?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll start there, and then we'll pass the mic around. So go for it.
Yeah, no, so I'm just wondering about the statistics of Washington State versus the rest of the states. Just high level number of EVs and.
In terms of the big EV adoption, we are leading, but we are behind California. So in nationwide, California is the highest in terms of EV adoption.
Yeah. Just in general.
Yeah, I'm not aware.
We do a lot of research. Oregon, Maine, so East Coast, New York, surprisingly not just the city, but Texas, very high. And then there's EV adoption, rate increase, right? So it's the growth rate that I think is almost more interesting than just what the current EV adoption rate is.
And within Texas, do you know what cities or what?
Austin, Houston, otherwise mostly those areas, yeah.
I think also a metric that we're looking at is electric vehicles that are not just cars. So when you look at other vehicle types like e-bikes, that changes the equation because we're also assuming that folks will be mode shifting away from driving for their primary mode of transportation. So that's another metric that we're looking into.
Good question. All right. Yes.
I also had a question about somebody there, and I was curious if you had made any effort to kind of disentangle, I guess, the rate of adoption of EVs from just the rate of buying new cars. It was interesting to see how that was geographically dispersed, but I'm curious if you have any insights as to kind of the decision of if someone's buying a new car in the first place, what factors might impact whether they buy an IC or an EV car.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, the data we have and the adoption rate we calculated includes resale, renew. So it is directly from the registration data. It tells us whether it's a new vehicle transaction or it's a renew license. So we actually, the rates you see are for every year how many EV are registered. So it actually includes resell a vehicle as well as renew a vehicle. Yeah, and we can separate them out and compare. We are not there yet. Yeah.
So let's have one more question back there.
I'm just curious about if you also look at the pricing point of those EVs and to what extent the price of EV will have an impact on the adoption in the future. What do you expect?
That's a very good question. It's slightly more towards a business-oriented, business and policy. the current research scope for my research project is more focused on the EV infrastructure system in terms of how an infrastructure can equitably support the community as well as casual travelers passing through the community. But that's a very good question, and I do think, I do think there's more we should look into it in terms of there's more and more higher end models and less lower end model, because that the current market, the current buyer or the current owner of the EV users, where you see they are, this profile, but in terms of pushing zero emission goal, we have to cater to a different, include more market basically. Thank you.
So what we found is the number of vehicle types that are sold in the country help drive down the price. There's a very direct correlation there. And so once, the Teslas bring down their price, other vehicle types need to bring down their price. That's helpful. So now I believe it's 40 vehicles that are mostly manufactured and assembled in the U.S., 40 vehicle types. There is a tax incentive that's tied to that, where the vehicle is manufactured. Now mostly commercial companies are benefiting from that, because now it's not limited to if it's manufactured in the U.S. or elsewhere. But we did find a very strong correlation between, of course, vehicle price and adoption. Yeah.
And I'll just add for our truck incentive program, so drayage trucks often are owned by the truck driver. They're not owned by a fleet, which is why we have this incentive program, because even with the cost savings from maintenance and fueling, the price delta between a diesel truck and an electric truck never penciled out for an individual owner to adopt that. So much like personal vehicles, maybe not to the highest extent, but for heavy-duty trucks, incentives are really needed for people to actually adopt them, because there still is too great of a cost differential.
Few questions back there, and then I'll get to you.
Bill included a new program called the HEVI program to establish electric vehicle charging infrastructure in states. Do you know if that law contains equity provisions or requirements as far as the distribution of those?
So we looked into that. Couldn't find anything on equity, honestly, which is a good opportunity for us, but probably not for people who need that.
I talked with the government official the other day, actually not long ago, and they are about to launch specific the evaluation criteria that includes disadvantaged communities and the community with less access to charging infrastructure. So they are trying to put together scoring criteria that they want to use for future infrastructure planning. So I think it's forthcoming. So it will be more reflected later, and when they are looking at the infrastructure planning, and they're trying to reflect on more equitable solutions, more equitable access.
Just a quick follow-up. The majority of the $1 billion was just focused on completing a nationwide national highway charging system. So equity was really not a factor for the states putting forward their plans, because the focus was how do you connect the dots? The idea being able to drive across any state, ultimately across the country, utilizing a nationwide charging network. Now the other funding, that $2.5 billion, a piece of that is the CFI, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's a community refueling. Anyway, it is a grant program driven towards cities and other entities that can apply, or even community organizations that can apply for that funding for transportation electrification, and that does have a lot of called Justice 40 is the federal term for equity, and so they have a Justice 40 lens with that grant program part of that.
Thank you, Andrew. But this is good. I mean, we should have a conversation, and if you have additional insights to offer up after we have questions, this is the place to do it. She had a question. Go for it.
I have a question for Daphne about the charging stations for the CRE. customers, I was wondering if the stations would be limited to tenants, and then also would payment methods be app-based or not app-based and like reasoning behind the payment method?
Are you a student here?
Yes.
Awesome. Yes, so there's two phases of it. First phase is very much focused on the supply side, so creating a network. And so in order to do that, we include features that first help solving their existing problems. That means satisfying their tenants and technology companies that are located in their buildings, and then the commercial real estate like management companies. There's a lot of incentives tied to that. And then secondly, we do want to open it up to external users, which is kind of like the second phase, which I think we need to deserve that right in order to do that. So we have to have enough of them and enough in one place. And for that, we would want to open it up and do also like access management and stuff like that. What's the second part of your question?
I have a question about the payment method.
Oh, yeah.
Would be app-based.
Yeah, whatever, like your phone wallet, so, yeah. And then depending on who the customer is, it could be through the management company, the parking garage. That's actually kind of a case by case right now, but I think that's going to change.
Yeah. I'll get you after that, Andrew.
There's theory around the ownership of vehicles, that there's lesser interest in owning vehicles versus mobility as a service. Do you have any stats on it or any thoughts overall? Or as the generation, the newer generation doesn't seem like very cheap.
You're talking about leasing versus owning of personal vehicles?
Yeah, and then and versus fleet or as a service type of thing.
Maybe you're better in fleet. I think on a personal side, you see there's a lot of reports like from Bloomberg and whatever that says that the number of people leasing is going up versus owning. There is some level of curiosity around battery management and how it's going to play out in the future. And then there is a lot of like incentives for leased vehicles, and that's because what I mentioned earlier, most affordable vehicles are not manufactured in the U.S., therefore that tax credit is only applicable if you're a commercial company, and then that's passed on to the end user through a lease program. So you see the number of people leasing vehicles going up.
I'll also note that we are working a lot with our shared mobility providers to electrify, so that includes Zipcar, GigCar, Share. Those services are quite popular in Seattle. We're also working to electrify Uber and Lyft, and then ensuring that future transportation modes like autonomous vehicles are all electric, recognizing that in the future there might be less personal car ownership, but the trend in Seattle is that there's still a very high percentage of folks owning cars, and even if that changes in the future, the vehicle stock in the city will likely remain pretty high.
Any other thoughts before I...
Go ahead.
This is a little bit of off discussion, but also not about the vehicle ownership, but about charging infrastructure ownership. There's a lot of discussion about who owns what. And in terms of P3 implementation, there are a lot of business model that talks about energy as a service or charging as a service, where the public entity come in and develop the hosting and maintain for the so many years to come. So I think that's also a big important discussion that we have to have as a society, not only for the vehicle ownership, but also for charging infrastructure ownership.
I have one more question.
Chris, in your presentation, did you show a map of the aggregated availability of charging at home in Seattle?
Yeah, that's specific to residential chargers.
Residential chargers. So what's the source of that data? How is it being tracked?
So you go to the city portal, and then there's a permit that you have to pull. So for the level 2 charging, you have to request the electrical permit from the city, and so it's like one-to-one match. So it tells you where it is and when it was installed. So it's very accurate data that you can get.
I had a 240 outlet installed in my driveway. I did not get a permit for it. So
oh, I'm not going to tell anybody. Okay.
We found, so even those, I think we found, so what we did is we did individual addresses versus aggregated data because it's just more useful for us. But I think we found ways to also identify those that didn't apply for a permit. We can talk about it later. I don't know how legal it is, but it's very useful. Yeah.
And I'll also really quickly add that the City of Seattle is able to determine if someone is charging based on smart meter information by the electric load profile. So that's other data that we're looking into because all meters in Seattle service area are smart meters now.
Do they make that data available?
Exactly.
No.
So much work for us.
Really quick.
Okay, I'm just going to throw this one and then we'll call it good. Question about e-bikes, and that didn't come up in the discussion where we were talking about vehicles, but that question actually dovetails into, like, it's clearly a lot harder market to track, I would think, at the research level, but I'm curious if any of y'all as researchers or your business has tried to start figuring out how you start to unpack the e-bike market using data that, I'm just curious.
I can start us off maybe. So, Kelly, you know this, but we are tracking data from the shared bike program, and then we're also leveraging bike counters, but we are also going to be really engaged in the state is launching an e-bike incentive program that will require data reporting from the sellers, so we'll get data from that, and then the topic of conversation is there a way for us to purchase data from another provider on e-bike utilization for personal bikes? And that's something we're looking into simply because we recognize that e-bikes are significantly more accessible than electric cars to most people, and you saw in our climate change response framework that we do have to divert trips away from personal vehicles, and e-bikes are one of those mechanisms.
I find it's a difficult one because from a business perspective, I feel like based on what I've seen in Europe, I haven't seen any successful business models work out well when it comes to e-bikes because of the high operational costs. And so I would love to see it work out in the future, but I have a lot of questions around how that's going to be implemented, to be honest.
But individually owned?
No, sharing programs. Individually owned is quite big where I'm from. I don't see a big deal there, but yeah.
I haven't looked at e-bikes yet, but I think that could be a next research topic Ling and I can develop together because we share great interests. We just realized like not long ago, so something that we can look into. But for now, we don't look at e-bikes yet. Do you have anything then?
Okay, so I want to remind you, it's great that everyone stuck around for this conversation. They'll be around, but I want to give our panel one round of applause. Don't let this be the last conversation. The whole point of this is that it gives you ideas of like the next wave of transportation, electrification. It's got to be different. So we don't have gas stations in our houses, but we now have charging stations in our houses. So how does that work out? And what are those different problems, challenges, and opportunities that are involved? So thank you for being here, and hopefully we can continue the conversation.
Do you think you guys can publish papers? We're looking into doing that as well, and would like to collaborate actually.
Yeah,
if you guys are open to it.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah.
Great.
Publication is always
That's